What if the strength you're chasing isn't found in holding on, but in letting go? What if the breakthrough you've been begging for won't come through more effort, but through surrender? The world tells you to stay strong, keep pushing, fake the smile, carry the weight, solve the problem yourself. But the truth? You're exhausted. Not because you're weak, but because you've been trying to be God in a situation that only God can fix. Here's something no one told you. God isn't impressed by your independence. He's not waiting for you to prove how tough you are. He's waiting for you to hand it over. All of it. The worry you can't shake. The pain you won't speak. The questions you pretend don't haunt you at night. He sees every silent battle, and he's not afraid of your mess. He wants it. Because here's the paradox no one talks about. The moment you stop trying to carry everything is the exact moment God starts to move. Not when you understand it. Not when you feel holy enough. But when you're finally honest enough to say, God, I can't. I need you to. If you've been trying to figure it all out, fix everyone, and stay spiritually strong while secretly falling apart, this message is for you. There's a kind of peace you can't earn. There's a strength that only shows up when you stop pretending. And there's a God who already knows what you're facing and wants to carry it with you. So what would happen if today you stopped holding it all together and finally placed it in His hands? There comes a moment in every person's life when they reach the edge of their own strength. Maybe it's after trying everything you could think of. You've planned meticulously, sacrificed endlessly, strategized with precision, and still things don't fall into place. The job didn't work out. The relationship crumbled. The health report came back worse than expected. It's in those moments, raw and quiet, when reality collides with human limits, that the soul whispers a simple truth. You're not in control anymore. And maybe you never were. Letting go of control isn't about laziness or surrendering responsibility. It's about releasing the illusion that you can carry the weight of the world on your shoulders and still walk freely. So many live exhausted, not because life is too heavy, but because they're carrying what was never meant to be theirs. Control is addictive. It masquerades as safety. But in reality, it often becomes a prison built with the bricks of anxiety, perfectionism, and fear. When you grip too tightly, you close your hands to the very help heaven is offering. Think about it. How many nights have you laid awake running through every possible scenario in your mind, as if worrying hard enough might rewrite the outcome? But control doesn't change outcomes. It only steals peace in the process. God doesn't ask you to fix everything. He invites you to trust Him with what you can. That's the shift. That's the surrender. It's not about letting go, hoping something magical happens. It's about releasing your grip and placing that situation, whatever it is, into hands far more capable than yours. There's a beauty in letting go that can't be experienced when we're clinging. Imagine standing on a mountain, holding a kite. As long as your grip is tight, the kite won't rise. But when you loosen your hold, it catches the wind and soars. That's what happens when we let go of control. It's not failure, it's flight. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. And the wind you feel lifting you, that's grace. Unseen but faithful. Uncontrollable but sure. Letting God lead isn't passive. It requires more courage than clinging ever did. It means moving when He says move, even when you don't have all the details. It's waking up and showing up, not because you know the full picture, but because you trust the painter. Abraham left his homeland without knowing the destination. Moses walked into Pharaoh's court without a backup plan. Peter stepped out of the boat into a storm. Faith is rarely convenient, but it is always rewarded. There's a strange freedom that comes when you finally admit, I don't have to have it all figured out. The pressure lifts. The fear loosens. Your soul takes a deep breath, because suddenly you realize it was never your job to be God. You were never meant to orchestrate every detail, anticipate every outcome, control every variable. That role was taken a long time ago, and the one who holds it is infinitely more qualified. God is not asking for perfection. He's asking for participation. He's not demanding that you never doubt, never worry, never stumble. He's simply inviting you to walk with Him anyway, to bring your uncertainty, your trembling hands, your fragmented prayers, and still move forward. Trust doesn't mean never feeling afraid. It means choosing to keep walking, even when fear whispers loudly in your ears. And when you do let go, really let go, you begin to see how often your control was slowing you down. Like trying to swim upstream with weights on your ankles, your efforts, though earnest, were exhausting you. But God's current flows differently. His direction may not be predictable, but it is purposeful. He doesn't promise ease, but he guarantees presence. And there's nothing more stabilizing than knowing he's with you, even when everything around you feels unstable. Sometimes the breakthrough you're desperate for isn't on the other side of more effort. It's on the other side of surrender. That diagnosis you can't reverse, that door that won't open, that heart that won't change, it might not be yours to fix. And that's okay. You were never asked to play Savior. You were asked to follow the Savior. There's healing in handing him the pen and letting him write the story, even when the chapter you're in doesn't make sense yet. Control convinces you that peace comes from having answers, but true peace comes from knowing the answer. Jesus never said we'd understand everything. He said we'd never be alone. And that promise holds steady through chaos, confusion, and the unknown. When you let God lead, you trade your understanding for his sovereignty. And that's a trade you'll never regret. Have you ever seen a child fall asleep in a parent's arms, completely at rest, completely unbothered by the chaos around them? That's the picture of trust. Not because the world is calm, but because the one holding them is. That's what God offers you. Not a life without storms, but peace within them. Not answers for every question, but his hand through every season. The question is, will you release the wheel? Letting go might mean walking away from your plan. It might mean accepting that you don't know what's next. It might look like closing a door you beg to stay open. But on the other side of that release is the kind of peace you can't fake. The kind that doesn't depend on circumstances, because it's anchored in the unchanging nature of God. You don't have to understand to trust. You just have to obey. You might still wrestle with control. That's okay. This isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily surrender. Some days you'll feel strong. Other days you'll feel like collapsing. But every day is a new opportunity to say, God, I give this back to you. The more you practice it, the lighter you'll feel. Because the burden wasn't designed for your shoulders, it was meant for his. And maybe that's the secret no one talks about. That surrender isn't the end of your strength, it's the beginning of his. You stop striving and start abiding. You stop performing and start trusting. You stop fearing outcomes and start resting in promises. The most powerful posture you can take is on your knees with open hands. God isn't distant from your struggle. He sees the chaos in your mind, the ache in your heart, the questions that haunt you at night. He doesn't shame you for wanting control. He simply offers something better. His peace, his plan, his presence. All available the moment you release yours. This isn't just about trusting God with the big things. It's about trusting him with everything. The schedule, the relationship, the finances, the decisions, the timing. Especially the timing. Because control often hides itself in urgency. But trust waits. Trust breathes. Trust says, even if I don't see it yet, I believe he's working. And in time, you'll look back and realize the moments you surrendered were the turning points. Not because you gave up, but because you finally gave in to the one who's never failed. The shift from control to surrender isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's faith in action. And it's the first step to real freedom. So maybe today is your moment. Your invitation to let go, not with resignation, but with expectation. Not because you've lost hope, but because you're placing your hope where it belongs. And just maybe, that simple act of letting go will be the beginning of something you never could have orchestrated on your own. Surrendering everything to God doesn't always look dramatic. There's no lightning bolt, no angelic choir. Most of the time, it looks like quiet decisions in unseen corners of your life. It happens in those early morning hours when no one sees you crying on the floor, whispering, I can't do this anymore. It happens when you release the bitterness you've been nurturing for years. It happens when you unclench your fists, not knowing what's next, but finally willing to let go of what's been breaking you. When you surrender everything to God, you begin to notice that the world doesn't rest on your shoulders anymore. You no longer have to force outcomes or manipulate circumstances. Suddenly, the pressure to be your own savior disappears. You begin to breathe deeper, because surrender removes the invisible weight you didn't even realize you were carrying. Life doesn't necessarily get easier, but it becomes lighter. And that weight? It wasn't yours to carry to begin with. God doesn't ask for your surrender to take something from you. He asks so he can give something to you. He isn't interested in your performance. He's after your heart. The moment you offer him everything, he begins the work of reshaping it. Not to break it, but to bless it. Not to harm you, but to heal you. When you surrender everything, you're not left with nothing. You're left with more than you had when you're holding on too tightly. Peace, clarity, and divine alignment. One of the first things that happens when you truly surrender is that your identity begins to shift. You stop defining yourself by your performance, possessions, or position. You start seeing yourself through the lens of grace, not achievement. God reminds you that you are not what you do. You are who he says you are. And in that new identity, there is stability no circumstance can shake. You stop chasing affirmation because you've already been chosen. Surrender clears the fog. Suddenly, what was complicated becomes simple. You no longer waste energy trying to open doors God never asked you to walk through. You stop begging for things that aren't aligned with your purpose. It's not that your desires disappear, it's that they are purified. What you want begins to look more like what God wants for you. And when your heart aligns with heaven, you find direction without striving and joy without conditions. There's also a deeper sensitivity that begins to grow. When your soul is no longer cluttered with control and worry, you become more attuned to God's voice. You hear his whispers in places you used to overlook. A song lyric, a verse, a conversation. Even silence becomes sacred. The noise of the world fades, and the clarity of the spirit rises. Discernment becomes sharper. Decisions become more intentional. Not because you're smarter, but because you're surrendered. But let's be honest, surrender isn't easy. It often feels like loss at first, like handing over something precious and not knowing if you'll get it back. But what you gain in return is so much greater. Surrender opens the floodgates of God's provision. Maybe not in the way you expected, but always in the way you needed. It positions you to receive what you couldn't have held before. Because sometimes your hands have to be emptied before they can be filled. Think of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Even the Son of God, in his most human moment, struggled with surrender. If it's possible, let this cup pass from me. But not my will, yours be done. That's the ultimate picture of surrender. Not the absence of emotion, but the presence of obedience. Not a lack of desire, but a greater trust in the Father's wisdom. And from that surrender came the greatest miracle the world has ever seen. When you give everything to God, miracles start to feel less like surprises and more like natural consequences of walking with him. Provision comes from unexpected places. Relationships are restored. Peace guards your heart. Closed doors stop feeling like rejection and start feeling like protection. You stop measuring success by outcomes and start measuring it by obedience. And in that obedience, you find the kind of fulfillment you were chasing all along. People may not understand your surrender. They may see your calm as denial or your peace as passivity. But what they don't see is the anchor beneath the surface, the divine exchange that's happened in your heart. When you let go of control and give it all to God, he doesn't just change your circumstances. He changes your capacity. He enlarges your heart. He deepens your roots. And suddenly, what used to shake you no longer moves you. Surrender also restores order to your priorities. The things that used to dominate your thoughts lose their grip. You stop being a slave to the urgent and start living according to the important. You realize that not everything needs a response. Not every battle is yours to fight. Not every opinion deserves your attention. That's the power of a surrendered heart. It filters life through eternity, not emotion. You'll also notice that relationships begin to shift. Some people might walk away. That's okay. Surrender will sometimes cost you people who are attached to your dysfunction, not your destiny. Others will be drawn to your peace. They'll see something in you that can't be faked, a quiet confidence, a steady hope, a deep joy. And through your life, others will encounter the reality of a God who truly carries what we give him. Surrender is also contagious. When your children see you praying instead of panicking, they learn where real strength comes from. When your friends see you choose faith over fear, they begin to ask questions. When your community watches you remain rooted while everything around you shakes, they see that maybe there's more to this God you talk about than just religion. Your surrender becomes a testimony. You may not see the fruit of your surrender immediately. Sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes years. But the roots are growing the moment you let go. And in God's time, they will bear fruit, not just in your life, but in the lives of others. Because what He does in you through surrender is never just for you. It's for your family, your children, your legacy. Your healing becomes someone else's hope. And here's what's most beautiful. God doesn't need your perfection to work, He needs your permission. He moves not when you have everything figured out, but when you invite Him in. Surrender is the doorway to divine partnership. It's not the end of your story, it's the beginning of a new one. One where you are no longer the sole author, but where the author of life begins to write something far better than you could have imagined. So what happens when you surrender everything to God? You gain peace that passes understanding. You receive direction without striving. You develop resilience that doesn't depend on circumstances. You experience love that isn't earned. And you begin to live not from a place of performance, but from a place of presence, God's presence. And maybe that's the secret all along. Surrender doesn't shrink your life. It expands it. It doesn't take away your power. It returns it to its rightful source. It's not the end of who you are. It's the unveiling of who you were created to be all along. If you've been carrying more than your soul was meant to hold, Calm Your Heart was written for you. This ebook is a gentle biblical guide to help you stop striving, start surrendering, and rediscover the peace God already prepared for you. Inside, you'll find scriptures, prayers, and practical tools to help you lay down your burdens and walk in daily trust. The link is in the pinned comment below. Don't wait for peace to come later. Receive it now, right where you are. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from physical labor or lack of sleep. It's the weight on your soul, the quiet heaviness you carry in your chest day after day, the kind that doesn't go away with rest or distraction. It lingers in the background of your conversations, your decisions, your thoughts. Most of the time, you can't even fully explain it. You just know it's there. But what if that weight isn't yours to carry? What if you've been holding on to things God already removed from your hands? We are so used to managing our pain that we start mistaking it for identity. The disappointment becomes familiar. The guilt becomes background noise. The anxiety feels normal. It's like carrying a backpack so long that you forget it's even there, until someone asks you to take it off and you realize how heavy it really was. That's what happens with emotional burdens. Over time, they fuse with your sense of self, and you start to believe that being weighed down is just part of life. But it's not. God never asked you to carry shame. He never asked you to carry the blame for things outside your control. He never told you to carry trauma, resentment, or fear of the future. Somewhere along the way, we picked these things up, thinking we were being strong by holding them. But real strength isn't found in pretending you're okay. It's found in handing over what you were never meant to hold. And here's the truth. If Jesus already took it, you have no business carrying it anymore. The cross wasn't partial. It didn't cover some things and ignore the rest. It was total, complete, final. The moment He said, "It is finished," He meant it for your sins, your regrets, your mistakes, your deepest wounds. He took the punishment, the consequence, the shame, so you wouldn't have to. So why are you still walking around with chains that He already broke? Why are you still rehearsing narratives that heaven already rewrote? Letting go isn't denial. It's alignment. It's agreeing with what God has already said about you instead of clinging to the lies whispered by guilt, culture, or past experiences. It's not pretending that hurt never happened. It's choosing to believe that healing is now greater than history. Sometimes we keep revisiting things that God already resolved, not because they're unsolved, but because we haven't accepted that we're free. But freedom isn't a feeling, it's a fact. And the moment you start living like it, everything shifts. Imagine someone serving a prison sentence. Years pass. One day, the warden walks in with release papers, freedom granted. The cell door opens. But instead of leaving, the prisoner stays, sitting on the cot, arms crossed, insisting they're not ready. They have grown used to the confinement. It feels safer than the unknown. That's what many of us do with our emotional burdens. We stay in cells that have already been unlocked because freedom feels unfamiliar, even though it's exactly what we've prayed for. But healing doesn't wait for comfort. It begins the moment you say, "I won't carry this anymore." It's a choice, not a mood. It's saying, God, I trust you with this pain, this outcome, this fear, this person. It's not about ignoring what happened. It's about refusing to let it define your tomorrow. And when you place those burdens into God's hands, you're not being irresponsible. You're being obedient. He never called you to carry it. He called you to come. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. That's not poetry. It's a promise. But promises don't work unless you receive them. Some of us are so familiar with striving that rest feels like weakness. But rest isn't the absence of effort. It's the presence of trust. When you stop carrying what God already took, you're not stepping out of responsibility. You're stepping into healing. Think of the story of the woman with the issue of blood. 12 years of suffering. Doctors, pain, isolation, shame. She carried that burden everywhere until one day she reached for Jesus. One touch and the burden left her body. Not because she figured it out, not because she forced a solution, but because she stopped depending on her own strength and reached out in surrender. That's the posture of healing. Not pride, but humility. Not striving, but reaching. Carrying things you're not meant to carry will slowly drain your joy, steal your peace, and distort your view of God. You'll begin to see him as distant, indifferent, or even cruel, when in reality, he's been waiting the whole time for you to lay it down. We often treat God like a last resort, when he's supposed to be our first refuge. The moment we release what we've been holding, his peace floods in like a tide that was always waiting for permission. And here's what's wild. You can't carry God's peace and your pain at the same time. One always pushes the other out. That's why surrender is so powerful. It's not just about letting go. It's about making space. When your hands are full of bitterness, there's no room for joy. When your mind is full of fear, there's no space for clarity. When your heart is full of past failures, hope can't breathe. But when you clear the clutter, God fills the room. Sometimes we think holding on to pain is noble, that keeping it close honors what we've been through. But pain was never meant to be your home. It was meant to be a passage, a lesson, a season, not a sentence. You don't need to feel guilty for healing. You don't need to apologize for moving forward. What happened to you is real, but it doesn't get to dictate who you become. Your past may have shaped you, but it doesn't get to define you, not when grace rewrites stories. You are not the brokenness you've survived. You are not the mistake you made in a moment of weakness. You are not the rejection, the betrayal, the silence. You are not the addiction, the divorce, the diagnosis. You are not the sum of what went wrong. You are the child of a God who still wants to carry what's crushing you. The burden was never meant to be yours in the first place. So what do you need to let go of today? Maybe it's a relationship you've tried to fix but can't. Maybe it's a decision you regret but can't change. Maybe it's a wound so deep that you've stopped hoping it could heal. Whatever it is, if it's too heavy, it's not yours to carry. If it's draining your strength, distorting your joy, damaging your hope, lay it down, not because you're weak, but because he is strong. And here's the mystery. The moment you lay it down, you'll feel lighter. Not because the situation magically disappears, but because the weight shifts from your shoulders to his. And his shoulders have never failed to carry a cross. They won't fail to carry your heart. He carried the world's sin. He can carry your sorrow. He bore the full weight of wrath. He can bear your fear. He absorbed death. He can absorb your past. You don't have to keep revisiting the graveyard of old pain. You don't have to perform penance for things Jesus already paid for. You don't have to drag chains around when he already cut them loose. It's time to live free, to walk light, to rest in the assurance that what God took, you don't have to touch anymore. You are not abandoned. You are not alone. And you're not responsible for fixing what he already finished. So stop carrying what he already took. Lay it down and don't pick it back up. Trust that the hands that form the stars are steady enough to hold your story. And maybe, just maybe, that's where real healing begins. Not in trying harder, but in finally letting go. Fear has a way of convincing you that safety lies in control. It makes you believe that if you just worry enough, calculate every detail, and anticipate every possible disaster, you'll be okay. But what fear never tells you is that it's a thief. It steals sleep, joy, connection, clarity. It whispers worst-case scenarios and masks itself as preparation, when in reality, it's just protection gone rogue. And yet, even while fear works overtime, God is still writing a story that's far better than anything you've been afraid of. There's something holy about choosing trust in the presence of anxiety. It doesn't mean you don't feel fear. It means you don't let it dictate your decisions. Faith doesn't cancel fear. It overrides it. It stands up to the voices of panic and gently says, you don't get to lead anymore. Because the truth is, God's plans for you were written long before your fear ever found a voice. Before the worry, before the diagnosis, before the heartbreak. His story began in love, and it ends in glory. We often assume that fear is a signal to stop. But sometimes fear just signals that we're stepping into something new, something bigger than us, something we can't control. That's why trusting God is so difficult. It asks us to let go of the illusion that we're safer in our own hands. But here's the truth, you're not safer in the familiar, you're safer in His will. And His will is not always predictable, but it is always good. Think of Jonah. God asked him to go to Nineveh, and fear sent him running in the opposite direction. It wasn't just rebellion, it was panic. He didn't trust that God's plan was better than his comfort. So he fled, ended up in a storm, and got swallowed by a fish. It wasn't until he surrendered that peace returned. God's plan didn't change, but Jonah had to change to walk in it. The same goes for us. Our resistance never rewrites God's story. It only delays our healing. We fear the unknown because we've been trained to idolize certainty. We want the 5-year plan, the guarantees, the exit strategy. But God doesn't deal in blueprints. He deals in steps. Your word is a lamp to my feet, not a spotlight to my future. He gives you just enough light for today, because if you saw the whole journey, you might run the other way. Not because it's bad, but because it's bigger than you imagined. And your spirit needs time to grow into the person who can walk that path. When fear grips you, it makes God look small. It magnifies the problem and minimizes His power. It tricks you into believing that you're alone, forgotten, or that your situation is somehow too complex for heaven to handle. But nothing could be further from the truth. God isn't surprised by your circumstances. He's not scrambling for a plan B. His plans have always accounted for your missteps, your doubts, your delays. Nothing is wasted. Everything is redeemed. What if the very thing you're afraid of is the doorway to your destiny? What if the conversation you're avoiding, the risk you're hesitating to take, the dream you've put on pause, that's where God is waiting to meet you? We pray for breakthrough, but resist the process. We want miracles without movement. But faith is an action. It's stepping into the unknown with the confidence that God's goodness will follow you, even when the path isn't clear. Remember when Peter walked on water? He did the impossible, not because the conditions were perfect, but because he kept his eyes on Jesus. The moment he looked at the storm, he sank. The fear became louder than the faith. That's the tension we live in every day. Will we fix our eyes on the wind or on the one who calms it? The wind is real. The waves are strong. But the hand of Jesus is stronger. And when you fall, He doesn't scold you, He catches you. God's plans don't require you to be fearless. They require you to be willing. Willing to trust that His way is better than your own. Willing to walk even when you're unsure. Willing to believe that He can use broken pieces to build beautiful things. It's not about being brave, it's about being surrendered. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward anyway, knowing that God's love goes before you. Let's be honest, your fears are loud. They bring receipts. They show you past failures, point out all the risks, and remind you of what could go wrong. But God's track record is louder. His faithfulness spans generations. His power raised the dead. His grace found you in your worst moment and still called you beloved. His promises haven't expired. So when your fear speaks, let it, but don't obey it. Let faith be your reply. God's plans may not look like your expectations, but they will always exceed them in value. You may have wanted convenience. He gives you character. You asked for a shortcut. He gives you strength. You prayed for escape. He teaches endurance. And in the process, He rewrites your definition of good. Good doesn't always mean easy. It means holy. It means purposeful. It means eternally worth it. Fear tells you to stay small, stay hidden, stay safe. But God calls you into spaces that stretch you, not to destroy you, but to develop you. He doesn't need you to be perfect. He needs you to be present. The enemy uses fear to paralyze you. God uses faith to propel you. And the more you walk in obedience, the less power fear has over your mind. It may still knock on your door, but you'll stop answering it. Have you ever looked back on something you were once terrified of, only to realize later it was one of the best things that ever happened to you? That's the clarity surrender brings. It doesn't make sense at the time, but trust matures in hindsight. You begin to see the fingerprints of God in the places where fear tried to dominate. You realize that the storm didn't drown you. It revealed the anchor. The detour wasn't random. It was a redirection. God's plans don't just lead you out of fear. They lead you into purpose. Every step of trust builds your spiritual muscles. Every decision to choose His voice over anxiety teaches your heart who's really in charge. And little by little, your fear begins to shrink, not because the world gets safer, but because your faith gets louder. And one day, you'll realize you're walking freely in places you once tiptoed through with trembling. So what would your life look like if you stopped letting fear make the decisions? What would you do differently if you truly believe that God's plans are better than your worst-case scenarios? Would you apply for that position? Start that conversation. Say yes to that opportunity. Would you finally forgive? Finally move on. Finally say, I trust you, and mean it. You were not created to live in survival mode. You were made to thrive in surrender. God's plans for you are rooted in love, not punishment. They are built on wisdom, not randomness. And they are sealed with the kind of goodness that fear cannot imitate. So don't settle for a small life because of big fears. God's vision for you is wide, deep, and eternal. And He's not asking you to understand it. He's just asking you to follow. So take the step. Make the move. Say the prayer. Lift your hands. Trust His heart. And when fear comes knocking tomorrow, remind it that your life is no longer built on uncertainty. It's built on promises. And God's promises never fail. There comes a moment, sooner or later, when every strong, smart, capable person hits a wall they can't climb. They try every tool in the box. Logic, hustle, resilience, control. They stay up late thinking, reworking, planning. They offer advice to everyone else but can't quiet the storm inside themselves. That moment, when your hands are full but empty, when your heart is tired but still trying, that's when God gently steps in and whispers what your pride never wanted to hear. You were never meant to fix this alone. From the outside, it might look like you've got it together. You still show up to work. You answer texts. You laugh at the right moments. But inside, you're unraveling. You're trying to carry a load that was designed to be shared. The truth is, human strength has limits. No matter how put together you are, no matter how high-functioning your pain seems, eventually your soul will scream for relief. And that scream is not weakness. It's the sound of your spirit saying, let go. Let God. We live in a culture that idolizes self-sufficiency. Be your own hero. Fix yourself. Don't need anybody. These slogans sound empowering, but they quietly chain you to isolation. God never created us to carry burdens alone. That was never part of the original design. Even in Eden, paradise wasn't complete without relationship. And in today's broken world, that divine design hasn't changed. You were made for connection with others, yes, but first and foremost with the one who sees everything and still chooses to carry your load. You can't heal a heart that God hasn't touched. You can't restore peace with strategies alone. You can't outthink pain, outplan heartbreak, or outwork brokenness. These are spiritual issues, and they require a spiritual solution. That's why prayer isn't a last resort. It's your first strategy. Not because it's a religious obligation, but because it opens the door for divine intervention. When you give something to God, you're not giving up. You're giving it back to the one who always had the power to change it. Let's talk about Martha for a second, the sister in Scripture who was always busy, always fixing, always managing. When Jesus came to her house, she ran around preparing, cleaning, organizing. Meanwhile, Mary sat at his feet. Martha was stressed. Mary was still. One was managing the moment, the other was receiving it. And Jesus didn't scold Martha for her effort. He just reminded her that only one thing was necessary, his presence. That story wasn't about laziness or duty. It was about focus. When you're overwhelmed, maybe what you need isn't more productivity. Maybe it's more proximity to Him. Trying to fix things alone leads to exhaustion. You pray, but then you pick the burden back up. You trust, but then you panic when things don't shift fast enough. It's like handing someone a package and then yanking it back the second they walk away with it. That's what we do with God. We say, "I give it to you," and then obsess over outcomes an hour later. Surrender isn't a one-time event. It's a practice, a rhythm, a moment-by-moment decision to let go again. Sometimes what you're trying to fix isn't even yours to repair. Maybe it's a loved one's addiction, a relationship falling apart, a door that refuses to open. These things haunt you because you care deeply, but caring and controlling aren't the same. Love says, "I'm here with you." Control says, "I need to fix you." And only one of those voices reflects the heart of God. He never asked you to play Savior. That position is already filled. Giving it to God doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop controlling. It means you show up in love, in presence, in obedience, but you leave the outcomes to Him. It means you pray without trying to manipulate. You listen without trying to force. You love without trying to rescue. That kind of surrender brings a peace the world can't replicate. Because peace isn't found in fixing, it's found in releasing. There's something incredibly humbling about saying, "God, I can't do this." It sounds like defeat, but in the kingdom, that's where real strength begins. Scripture says His power is made perfect in weakness, not in your competence, not in your 5-year plan, but in your vulnerability. When you admit your limits, you make space for His limitless presence. And when He fills that space, miracles start happening. Not always immediately, not always obviously, but always faithfully. Think about the loaves and fishes. The disciples had nothing that could feed a crowd, just scraps. But they gave what little they had to Jesus. And in His hands, not only was it enough, it was more than enough. He broke it, multiplied it, and met needs they couldn't even see. That's what happens when you offer your not enough to the one who is always sufficient. Your broken pieces become a banquet in His hands. Maybe you're carrying shame over something you did or something done to you. Maybe you're desperate to fix a version of your life that doesn't exist anymore. Maybe you're exhausted from trying to hold everyone together while falling apart inside. Whatever your burden, the invitation is the same. Lay it down, not because it's easy, but because your soul can't afford the weight any longer. You weren't built for this, but He was. And let's be honest, sometimes we don't give things to God because we're afraid He won't fix them the way we want. We secretly believe that keeping control gives us a better chance at the outcome we desire. But holding on tight never made a miracle. Surrender is scary, but it's sacred. It's where transformation begins. And even when it doesn't look like what you pictured, it will always be what you needed. When you give it to God, you're not just releasing the outcome, you're choosing trust over torment. You're trading anxiety for assurance. You're stepping off the throne and letting the true King take His place in your life. That kind of trust rewires your thoughts. It redefines your worth. It reminds you that you were never expected to be everything for everyone. You only needed to be faithful to the one who is everything. So take a breath. Take a break. Take your hands off the wheel. God doesn't need your perfection to move. He needs your permission to work in the places you've been guarding. That relationship, give it to Him. That child you worry about every night, hand them over. That fear of failure, that pressure to perform, that ache from the past, let it go. He can handle it. He already has. You just have to let Him. You may not feel relief immediately. Surrender is a seed, not a switch. But over time, you'll feel the shift. Your shoulders will loosen. Your mind will slow down. Your prayers will feel different, not like begging, but like breathing. Because when you stop trying to fix it alone, you stop drowning in the impossible. And that's where grace lives, in the space between what you can't do and what only He can. You can't fix it alone. You were never meant to, but you were always meant to trust the one who can. For many people, surrender sounds like defeat. Like waving a white flag after you've run out of options. Like failure dressed in religious language. The world tells us that to succeed, you fight harder. Push through. Grind until it bends. So when someone says, just surrender it to God, It almost sounds like giving up, like quitting on your dreams, your plans, your control. But what if surrender isn't about abandoning your future? What if it's the only real way to access it? You see, surrender isn't passivity. It's not about laying down because you're weak. It's about choosing to lay down what was never yours to carry in the first place. When you surrender, you don't lose. You trade. You exchange anxiety for assurance. You swap your panic for peace. You release the illusion of control and receive the comfort of divine oversight. Surrender is not letting go of effort. It's letting go of ego. It's a sacred acknowledgement that God's wisdom is higher, His love is deeper, and His vision is clearer. Peace doesn't arrive when everything finally goes your way. That's circumstantial happiness, and it's fleeting. True peace is planted when you stop wrestling with what you can't fix and start resting in who already won. It's not born in perfection, but in presence. God's presence. The kind that meets you in the middle of unanswered questions and reminds you that you're not alone, even when you don't feel strong enough to keep going. Think of Jesus in the garden, just hours before the cross. He didn't pretend to feel strong. He didn't fake peace. He was in agony, overwhelmed by what was coming. And yet, in that vulnerable space, he surrendered. Not my will, but yours be done. That wasn't giving up. That was the most powerful act in human history. Through surrender, he unlocked resurrection. Through surrender, he brought salvation. And through surrender, he modeled what it means to trust the Father when nothing makes sense. The enemy would love to convince you that surrender is weakness, that if you stop trying so hard, you'll lose everything. But that's a lie dressed in logic. Because the truth is, striving often takes you further from what you're seeking. It keeps you spinning, chasing, exhausting every ounce of your strength. But peace begins when you sit down, when you unclench your fists, when you whisper, God, I trust you, even here. Some of the most peaceful people you'll ever meet are not the ones with the easiest lives. They're the ones who've surrendered the most. Not because life handed them everything they wanted, but because they laid down everything they couldn't carry. Peace isn't about control, it's about trust. It's about knowing that even if the path is steep, the guide is good. That even if the answers don't come quickly, the Comforter never leaves your side. And here's the paradox. Surrender doesn't mean disengagement. It doesn't mean you stop caring or sit still in passivity. It means your efforts come from a different posture, a posture of trust, not fear. You still show up. You still plant seeds. You still pray. But your heart is anchored. Your soul is not tossed by every wave. You're not hustling for approval or manipulating outcomes. You're walking in rhythm with a God who already knows the destination. Sometimes surrender looks like showing up with open hands. Sometimes it looks like saying no to things you once thought were essential. Sometimes it looks like sitting in silence long, enough to hear a whisper that cuts through your chaos. And often, it looks like laying your timeline, your expectations, your fears on the altar, and trusting that even if God rewrites the script, the ending will still be better than anything you could have written yourself. There is peace in knowing that you don't have to force your future, that you don't have to manipulate circumstances to make life work, that you don't have to strive to be seen or scream to be heard or run to catch up. In surrender, you begin to realize that you were never behind. You were never forgotten. God is never late. He's simply preparing you for the version of life that's actually good for your soul, not just convenient for your ego. Letting go doesn't mean letting your life fall apart. It means letting God hold the pieces you can't put back together. It means trusting that your waiting isn't wasted, that your pain isn't pointless, that your confusion isn't the absence of God. It's the invitation to depend on Him in ways you never would have if everything made sense. Surrender shifts your questions from, why is this happening? To, what are you doing in me through this? You don't need to fake peace. You don't need to pretend everything's fine. You don't need to suppress the ache. God doesn't need your performance. He wants your presence. He wants to meet you in the realness of your worry, the chaos of your emotions, the fog of your uncertainty. He's not looking for polished prayers or perfect theology. He's looking for your honesty. And surrender is often the most honest prayer you can pray. I can't do this. I need you. It's not a one-time thing either. Surrender is daily, hourly, even. It's choosing again and again to release what creeps back in, to refuse to carry what you already laid down. to stop trying to help God and instead walk with Him. That's where the deepest peace comes, not from control, but from communion. People might look at your surrender and think you've stopped fighting, but they won't see the spiritual strength it takes to lay it down. They won't understand the courage it takes to say, even if I don't see the outcome, I still believe in the one who holds it. They won't know how many nights you chose faith over fear, silence over striving, worship over worry. But heaven sees, and heaven honors what the world overlooks. There will be days when surrender feels like loss, when it feels like you've given up the dream, the relationship, the security. But in time, you'll see what you gained was infinitely more valuable. You gain clarity. You gain stillness. You gain strength that doesn't shout, but sustains. You gain peace that doesn't rise and fall with your circumstances. The kind of peace that sits with you in hospital rooms and quiet mornings, that walks with you through grief and into hope again. So no, surrender is not giving up. It's waking up to the truth that you don't have to be your own savior. That peace isn't found in more effort, but in deeper trust. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is fall to your knees and whisper. You take it from here, and the moment you do, heaven moves. Maybe not with thunder, maybe not with fireworks, but with stillness, with clarity, with a kind of peace that can't be faked because it's rooted in faith. Let go, not because you're done, but because you finally understand it was never yours to hold alone. That's where peace lives, in the hands of the one who's never let you fall. There's something incredibly lonely about facing a battle no one else sees. You smile on the outside, fulfill your responsibilities, answer texts with emojis, and laugh at the right cues. But beneath it all, there's a quiet war raging, a battle you didn't choose, can't explain, and sometimes barely survive. Whether it's grief, depression, heartbreak, fear, or the weight of responsibility, there's a fight happening behind your eyes. And maybe you've wondered, does anyone really see this? The answer is yes, God does. Not only does He see it, He understands it more intimately than you can imagine. He's not distant from your pain. He's not watching from a safe distance, hoping you figure it out. He's there, closer than breath, fully present in your suffering. The battles you hide from the world, He knows in full. Every ache, every anxious thought, every prayer that never made it past your lips. Not one moment has gone unnoticed by Him. You see, God doesn't just know about your battle, He walks through it with you. This is the difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy says, I'm sorry you're going through that. Empathy says, I'm in it with you. God is the God who enters the fire, sits in the storm, and walks into the valley. He didn't spare Daniel from the lion's den. He shut the lions' mouths while Daniel was inside. He didn't prevent the furnace for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He stepped into the flames with them. Sometimes the presence of pain doesn't mean the absence of God. It means the exact opposite. It means you're in a battle so significant, so sacred, that heaven wouldn't let you walk it alone. You may feel abandoned, but feelings aren't facts. You may feel overwhelmed, but your emotions don't get the final say. Your shepherd is with you in the shadows. He knows the terrain. He knows the trap. He knows the weight. And He knows exactly how the story ends. Trusting God with your battle isn't about pretending it doesn't hurt. It's not about smiling through trauma or slapping a verse on top of pain to silence it. It's about choosing to believe that your pain has a purpose, even if you can't see it yet. That your suffering isn't wasted. That your tears are counted. That your wounds are not the end of your story. They are the entry point for healing, restoration, and deeper intimacy with the one who loves you most. We often equate God's nearness with comfort. So when life is uncomfortable, we assume He's far away. But what if discomfort isn't a sign of distance? It's the evidence of development. What if the very thing you're trying to escape is the thing God is using to build a new strength in you? The battle isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's shaping something inside you that peace alone could never do. Storms don't mean you're outside of God's will. Sometimes they're proof that you're right where He wants you. Think about Elijah, one of the boldest prophets in the Bible. He called down fire from heaven, stood firm against hundreds of false prophets, and yet after all that, he collapsed under a tree and begged God to let him die. Exhausted, afraid, empty. And how did God respond? Not with shame, not with anger. He sent an angel, gave him food, let him rest, and then whispered to him, not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in a gentle whisper. That's how God meets us in battle. Not always loudly, but always personally. You don't have to have the right words. You don't need a perfect prayer. You don't need to know how this ends. You simply need to trust that the one who sees you is fighting for you. He knows the enemy's tactics. He sees the traps before you step into them. He strengthens you in ways you won't notice until later. And even when the battle is long, his endurance is longer. Even when you feel weak, he's never weary. Trusting him with a battle means releasing your obsession with outcomes. It means saying, God, even if this doesn't look how I wanted, even if the healing takes longer than I hoped, even if the restoration comes in ways I didn't expect, I'll still trust you. That kind of faith scares the enemy, because it's rooted not in what God can do, but in who God is. And when you trust who he is, you stop negotiating peace with your fear. Let's not pretend this kind of trust comes easy. It's forged in the fire. It's learned in the long nights. It's shaped when prayers feel unanswered and strength feels gone. But over time, you start to see the pattern. You see how God sustained you, how he protected you from battles you never knew about, how he gave you breath when you were ready to quit, how he placed people, songs, verses, and moments right when you needed them. You start to see that his presence isn't always loud, but it's always faithful. And here's the truth. Some battles aren't meant to be won in the traditional sense. They're meant to break chains you didn't even know you had, to expose lies you've believed since childhood, to heal wounds you buried deep, to shift your faith from religion to relationship. Sometimes God allows the battle not to defeat you, but to define you, to show you who you are when everything else is stripped away. A warrior, a worshiper, a child of the King. You were never expected to fight alone. That's why Scripture is full of reminders. The battle belongs to the Lord. Be still and know that I am God. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. These aren't just poetic lines for coffee mugs. They're promises for when you're on the floor crying, wondering if you'll ever be okay again. They are anchors for the days when your faith feels thin and your strength feels gone. So breathe. Cry if you need to. Feel what you feel. But don't let the battle convince you that you're abandoned. You are seen. You are loved. You are not forgotten. And the one who knows your battle better than anyone is already working behind the scenes, arranging things you can't see, fighting enemies you never met, and preparing victories that you didn't even know you needed. You're not losing just because you're tired. You're not failing just because you're feeling it. The fact that you're still showing up, still praying, still believing, that is victory. The fact that you haven't given up is evidence of God's strength in you. The battle isn't the whole story, it's just a chapter. And when the dust settles, you'll look back and say, I didn't win this alone. God carried me through. So go ahead, trust him with it. Not because it's easy, but because it's the only way to find peace in the middle of war. He knows the battle you're facing. And more importantly, he's already won. There are moments in life that feel like a fog you can't walk through. Questions rise that don't have answers. Pain enters uninvited and refuses to leave. Plans collapse. Prayers go unanswered. People walk away. Things that once made sense suddenly don't. And in those moments, the mind races for logic, for clarity, for meaning. You beg for understanding, as if knowing why could somehow ease the ache in your chest. But what if the peace you seek isn't hidden in explanation, but in surrender? We live in a world addicted to knowing. We Google symptoms, search for causes, read every article, consult every opinion. We believe if we can just connect the dots, we'll find healing. But some things in life don't connect, not right away. Sometimes the storyline doesn't unfold neatly. Sometimes there is no aha moment, no perfect revelation. And in that silence, in that mystery, God invites you to do something deeply countercultural. Let go of needing to understand. This isn't easy, especially when your heart is breaking, especially when you did everything right, especially when you prayed the right prayers, gave it your all, walked in faith, and still ended up in the wilderness. It doesn't feel fair. It doesn't feel holy. It feels like betrayal. But what if it's actually the setup for a deeper trust? What if the wilderness isn't proof of God's absence, but the place where you finally meet him beyond the edges of comprehension? Faith is not the absence of questions. It's the decision to trust God in spite of them. It's saying, even when I don't get it, I know you're still good. It's not pretending you're fine. It's not denying the pain. It's just refusing to let your lack of understanding define your view of God. Because sometimes the greatest breakthroughs happen not when God answers your questions, but when you trust Him enough to stop asking. Job knew this struggle well. A man who lost everything, his family, his wealth, his health, all without warning or reason. He asked hard questions. He cried out in confusion. And after a long stretch of silence, God responded, not with answers, but with presence. He reminded Job of who He is, the creator of oceans, the sculptor of mountains, the one who commands the stars. And that reminder was enough. Not because Job suddenly understood, but because he remembered that understanding wasn't the foundation, God was. You may never know why it happened, why the door closed, why the timing felt so cruel, why the pain came so sharp. But peace doesn't require full comprehension, it requires full confidence. And confidence is born when you stop demanding to understand everything and start resting in the truth that God understands what you never could. He sees the whole story, the angles you can't, the future you're not in yet. And in that view, He's still working for your good. Letting God handle what you don't understand doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean the grief disappears or the pain evaporates. It simply means you stop carrying it alone. You stop obsessing over the pieces that don't fit. You stop replaying the moment that broke you. You let go of trying to make sense of what was never yours to solve, and you place it gently in the hands of the one who knows. That relationship that ended without closure, He knows. That opportunity that slipped away too fast to catch, He saw it. That diagnosis that came out of nowhere, He's in the details. The tears you cried alone, the anger you couldn't express, the confusion that still lingers, He's not indifferent. He's not silent because He doesn't care. He's silent because He's teaching you to trust the kind of peace that isn't built on answers, but on Him. There's power in praying, God, I don't get this, but I give it to you. It's the posture of peace. It's the beginning of release. It's how healing starts, not when everything is clear, but when your heart chooses surrender over suspicion. When you choose to trust that what God didn't prevent, He will redeem. That what you don't understand now, He may reveal later or maybe never. But either way, He's still trustworthy. Think about Mary at the cross, watching her son, the Messiah, bleed and die. Nothing about that moment made sense. How could this be part of the plan? And yet, 3 days later, the resurrection proved what she couldn't have known that Friday. That God's silence wasn't abandonment, it was strategy. That moment of horror was actually the hinge of all hope. What felt like the end was the beginning. She didn't need to understand it to witness the miracle. God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are higher, wider, deeper. He works in dimensions we can't see, timelines we can't predict, and outcomes we could never construct. When we demand to understand before we trust, we limit our faith to human logic. But when we trust first, even in the fog, we open ourselves to supernatural peace. A peace that doesn't answer every question, but holds you until the questions no longer hurt as much. Sometimes your healing will come after your surrender, not before. The clarity might arrive when you're no longer straining for it. The purpose might reveal itself years down the line, or not at all. And even if it never does, your faith will have grown roots in the deepest soil. Trust that doesn't demand answers but worships in the waiting. Because peace isn't found at the end of understanding. It's found in the presence of the one who sees it all. There's a freedom that rises when you let go. A lightness. Quiet strength. You stop rehearsing pain. You stop building imaginary futures around things you can't fix. You stop blaming yourself for things God already covered in grace. You stop fearing the unknown because you're finally resting in the truth that even if you don't understand a situation, He understands you. Your fears, your needs, your capacity, your breaking point. And here's what's beautiful. God never mocks your confusion. He doesn't roll His eyes at your questions. He welcomes the honesty, but He gently invites you to lay them down, to exchange your need for control for a deeper kind of faith. One that walks with Him even in the dark. One that doesn't flinch when the answers don't come. One that says, I don't need to know how, when, or why. I just need to know you're here. So maybe today is the day to stop wrestling, to stop trying to make sense of something that may never fully resolve in your mind. Maybe today is the day you take the mystery, the heartache, the questions, and lay them at his feet, not with bitterness, but with boldness. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've started trusting. Not because you've figured it out, but because you finally realized you don't need to. Let God handle what you can't understand. He already is. And when you stop needing all the answers, you might just discover that the peace you've been searching for was never hidden in explanation. It was hidden in Him all along. There's a sacred moment, often quiet, often unseen, when a person runs out of strength. Not because they're lazy, not because they didn't try hard enough, but because life simply hit harder than expected. The grief stayed too long. The questions got louder. The pressure mounted. And no matter how much faith, effort, or positivity they mustered, they reached the end of themselves. That moment doesn't feel holy. It feels like failure. But in God's hands, that moment is where something holy begins. Because where human strength ends, divine strength begins. Most of us were taught to push through, to grit our teeth, keep moving, keep showing up, to hold it together, especially in front of others. But the soul isn't built for constant performance. Eventually, it breaks down. It weeps. It whispers, "I can't anymore." And contrary to what the world says, that's not the point where you fall apart. It's the point where grace steps in. Because your weakness isn't your disqualification. It's your invitation to let God take over. He doesn't need you to be superhuman. He doesn't require you to fake joy, force clarity, or pretend everything's fine. He simply asks for surrender. He steps into weakness not to scold, but to strengthen. And His strength isn't like ours. It doesn't run out. It doesn't need recharge. It doesn't fluctuate with mood or energy. His strength is steady, eternal, always enough, especially when we are not. The Apostle Paul knew this well. He begged God 3 times to remove a thorn from his life, a burden, a pain, a weakness we're never told the details of. But instead of removing it, God responded with a truth that still echoes across generations. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul didn't receive a solution. He received a shift in perspective. Weakness wasn't the problem. It was the platform for God's power to shine. Let that sink in. Your limitations are not liabilities. They're launching pads for the miraculous. God isn't waiting for you to get stronger before He steps in. He's waiting for you to stop pretending you don't need Him. Because the strongest version of you is not the one who holds it all together. It's the one who falls apart in His presence and lets Him rebuild what life has shattered. When you're weak, you learn to listen. Pride is quieted. Ego is humbled. The noise of striving fades. Suddenly, the voice of God becomes clearer, not because He finally spoke, but because you finally stopped long enough to hear. Weakness slows you down in all the right ways. It brings you back to the basics. God, I need you. And that simple prayer carries more weight than any grand declaration. Because it's honest. And heaven responds to honesty. Letting God take over doesn't mean you disappear. It doesn't mean you stop showing up. It means you stop trying to be your own source. You stop drawing from an empty well. You stop acting like it all depends on your brilliance, your stamina, your talent. And instead, you start leaning, really leaning, on the one who never runs dry. He becomes your source, your sender, your rest. Think about Peter. The same man who walked on water also sank in it. The same voice that boldly declared, "You are the Christ," later denied Him 3 times. Peter was impulsive, emotional, and flawed. But Jesus didn't give up on him. After the resurrection, He met Peter not with condemnation, but with restoration. "Do you love me?" He asked, not to shame, but to recommission. That's the kind of God who meets us in weakness, not with lectures, with love. Your weakness doesn't scare God. He's not surprised by your breaking point. He's not disappointed when your strength runs out. In fact, He anticipates it, because that's when His strength takes over. When you're done striving, He starts lifting. When you stop fixing, He begins restoring. When you release control, He fills the space with peace that surpasses understanding. And here's what's beautiful. You don't have to feel strong to be carried by Him. You don't have to wait for confidence to arrive before you trust. Sometimes the greatest step of faith is whispering help from the bottom of your heart. It's crying without words. It's collapsing into his arms. And in that moment, his strength meets you, not like a lightning bolt, but like a steady hand pulling you back to your feet. You're not a burden when you're weak. You're not broken beyond repair. You're not less valuable. You're simply human. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you'll discover the kind of peace that doesn't depend on performance. You'll stop tying your worth to how much you produce. You'll stop trying to impress a God who already chose you. You'll rest, not just physically, but spiritually. Letting God take over also means trusting that He sees the whole battlefield. When you're in the middle of it, all you see is the chaos, the fear, the uncertainty. But God sees from above. He sees how this moment fits into the greater story. He sees what's being developed in you through the very thing you wish would end. And while He doesn't always remove the fight, He always fights for you. His strength doesn't show up just to comfort, it shows up to conquer. Sometimes, the most powerful prayers come from the lowest places. Not polished, not poetic, just raw, honest. God, I can't do this. Take over. And that prayer moves mountains. Because it's the opposite of pride. It's the sound of surrender. And surrender is the soil where miracles grow. Maybe you're carrying the weight of a diagnosis, the ache of loneliness, the pressure of providing, or the shame of past mistake. Maybe you're tired of pretending you're okay. Tired of being the strong one. Tired of fighting battles in your own strength. If that's you, you're not alone. And you're not weak for feeling that way. You're brave for surviving this long. But you don't have to carry it another step by yourself. Let Him take over. Let His strength become your foundation. Let His grace replace your striving. Let His power sustain you when your own has run dry. And as you do, you'll find a new kind of strength, one that doesn't shout, but holds. One that doesn't burn out, but builds up. One that meets you in the ashes and turns them into beauty. You were never expected to be strong enough on your own. That's the lie culture sells. But heaven offers something better. Not independence, intimacy. Not performance, presence. Not endless hustle, but holy rest. And in that rest, you will find strength you didn't know existed. Not your own, but His. Always available. Always enough. There comes a moment when carrying it all simply becomes too much. You've prayed. You've planned. You've cried in secret and smiled in public. You've tried to fix it, organize it, make sense of it. But the weight just keeps getting heavier. And eventually, you have to ask yourself, what am I holding on to that I was never meant to carry? That question doesn't come from weakness, it comes from wisdom. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to fight harder, but to lay it all down. Laying it down isn't quitting. It's not laziness or giving up on your faith. It's doing the bravest thing a soul can do, admitting, I can't do this without you, God. It's choosing rest over control, surrender over stress, faith over force. It's opening your hands and releasing what you thought you had to manage on your own. And here's the mystery. It's in that letting go that miracles begin. Because when you lay it all down, you make room for God to pick it up. But we're trained to hold on, to micromanage outcomes, to be responsible for things we were never assigned. That's why laying things down feels unnatural at first. You've been the strong one, the fixer, the planner, the one people count on. But who's holding you? Who's lifting your arms when they're shaking? God is not just a backup plan. He's the plan. He's not the emergency contact. You were always meant to rely on Him from the start. Think about Abraham. God told him to lay down his promised son, Isaac, not because He wanted to take Isaac away, but because He wanted Abraham's heart fully surrendered. The moment Abraham laid his most precious thing on the altar, heaven moved. Provision showed up. Destiny unlocked. And that principle hasn't changed. The altar is still the place where things multiply, where things shift, where the supernatural invades the natural. But something has to be placed there first. What's your Isaac? What are you clinging to that's actually blocking your blessing? Is it fear? A relationship? An unfulfilled dream? A timeline you thought would have happened by now? Maybe it's bitterness you haven't released or expectations you refuse to surrender. Whatever it is, it's safe in His hands. He's not asking for it to punish you. He's asking for it so he can bless you. So he can remove what's weighing you down and replace it with what you didn't know you needed. And here's the truth. God can't fill hands that are already full. When you're holding on tightly to your plans, your pain, your need for control, there's no room for the new thing he's trying to bring into your life. But when you empty your hands, when you lay everything down, you create space for heaven to move. And what he brings is always better than what you gave up. Always. Sometimes the thing you need most isn't an answer, it's release. You don't need the situation to change right now. You need your heart to stop striving. You need your spirit to breathe again. And that begins when you say, God, I'm done carrying this. I'm laying it down, not with bitterness, but with trust. That's not weakness. That's worship. And God honors worship that costs something. Lay down your past. All the moments you wish you could undo. All the shame you've carried quietly. All the forgiveness you haven't given yourself. God already sees it, and still, he calls you beloved. You're not defined by your worst day. You're defined by the cross, by grace, by a Savior who took your burden before you ever picked it up. You can release it now. It's been paid for in full. Lay down your future, the unknown, the what-ifs, the questions that keep you up at night, the fear of not being enough, of not getting there in time, of failing. You don't have to chart every step. God's already in your tomorrow, preparing what you can't see. You don't need to know how, you just need to know who. And when the who is Jesus, peace isn't optional, it's inevitable. Lay down your relationships, the ones you're afraid to lose, the ones you're trying to fix, the people you've been carrying emotionally, spiritually, even financially. You can't be their savior, but you can love them better when you're not playing God in their lives. When you hand them over to the one who knows them best, healing can finally begin. Not just for them, but for you. Lay down your need to understand. Your obsession with making it all make sense. Some chapters won't come with clarity. Some answers will only come in eternity. But God isn't asking you to figure it all out. He's asking you to trust that he already has. There's peace in not needing all the pieces. There's freedom in saying, even if I don't understand this, I still believe you're good. And once you lay it down, watch what God will do. Watch him restore what you thought was ruined. Watch him bring joy where only grief lived. Watch him use the very thing that broke you to build something unshakable. He doesn't just heal, he redeems. He doesn't just patch up the pain, he transforms it into purpose. That's what happens on the other side of surrender. Things don't stay the same. They resurrect. God isn't limited by your circumstances. He's not boxed in by your lack of resources or time. He's not waiting for perfect conditions to move. He's waiting for an open heart. A heart that says, I'm done doing this alone. A heart that finally realizes that the most productive thing you can do sometimes is release. That your role is not to be everything, but to trust the one who is. And the beauty of it all, once you lay it down, you don't have to pick it back up. You don't have to revisit it and worry every 10 minutes. You don't have to track every outcome. You don't have to panic if it doesn't go according to plan, because you've transferred ownership. You've said, God, this is yours now. And when something belongs to him, it is always in better hands. So what are you still holding on to? What's stealing your peace, robbing your rest, draining your spirit? What's keeping your hands full and your faith small? Today might be the day to stop managing and start surrendering. Not because you're done, but because you're ready for what only God can do. Lay it all down, not in defeat, but in expectation. Not in fear, but in freedom. And then step back and watch. Watch how God moves when he has all of you. Watch how peace comes not because circumstances change, but because you did. Watch how burdens lift, how clarity grows, how miracles begin, not because you forced them, but because you finally made room. And when he moves, you'll know this wasn't me. This was God. This was grace. This was what I was waiting for all along. There are burdens so heavy that they become part of you. They settle in your posture, tighten in your chest, follow you from sunrise to sleep. Maybe it's a secret you've kept for years, a family weight you carry in silence, a private pain no one else understands. And somewhere along the way, you decided, consciously or not, that this was yours to bear. That if you didn't hold it, it would all fall apart. That no one else could handle it. That God might not show up if you set it down. But that belief was never true. God never asked you to carry it alone. In fact, one of the earliest things Jesus said to his followers was this: "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Not, "I'll give you answers." Not, "I'll fix it overnight." Not, "I'll make everything easy." But rest. Soul deep rest. Relief from the pressure to hold everything together. Rest that whispers, "You are not alone in this." Some of the most spiritual things you can do are also the most human. Admit you're tired. Confess that you're overwhelmed. Reach out instead of pulling away. The enemy wants to isolate you with your burden, convince you that no one would understand, that you'll be judged, that even God is disappointed. But grace tells a different story. Grace leans in when you feel shame. Grace carries what your hands can't hold. Grace doesn't avoid your heaviness. It meets you right in it. You were created for relationship. That includes your relationship with God, but also with others. Scripture says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." That means it's not just okay to share what you're carrying, it's holy. Let that sink in. Inviting someone else into your pain isn't weakness. It's obedience. It's sacred. And it opens the door for healing to enter places that secrecy has suffocated. Think of Moses, a man called by God to lead an entire nation out of slavery. Even he couldn't carry the weight alone. In Exodus, when Moses grew weary from holding up his hands during battle, Aaron and Hur came alongside him and held them up for him. That picture is still relevant today. There will be seasons when you can't hold yourself up anymore, and you're not meant to. That's why God places people in your life. That's why He created community, not independence. So why do we still insist on carrying it all ourselves? Because we think it's noble. Because we don't want to inconvenience others. Because we fear vulnerability will be met with judgment. Because pride whispers, "You should be able to handle this by now." But healing doesn't live in isolation. It lives in connection. It lives in honest conversations, in shared tears, in moments where someone else says, "Me too." And suddenly the burden gets lighter, not because the situation changed, but because you stopped carrying it alone. Letting others in doesn't mean you have to tell everyone everything. It just means finding someone safe. Someone who can sit with your mess without rushing to fix it. Someone who doesn't give you Christian cliches but reminds you that they see you, they care, and they're not going anywhere. And most importantly, inviting God into that same space. Not just the polished parts, the raw parts, the cracked parts, the parts you wish looked different. Because He already sees them. And He loves you anyway. God never expected you to be strong enough to carry every weight. That's why He offers Himself. That's why He sent Jesus, not to observe your pain from a distance, but to enter it. To feel every burden you've carried and to say, "I'll take that." The cross wasn't just about sin. It was about sorrow, about grief, about every crushing load this world could ever place on your back. And He bore it so you wouldn't have to. Sometimes your burden isn't just yours, it's generational. It's something passed down, a pattern, a wound, a weight that didn't start with you but landed on you anyway. And maybe you've been trying to be the one who breaks it. That's a beautiful calling, but even that isn't meant to be done alone. God isn't asking you to break chains in your own strength. He's inviting you to bring those chains to Him and watch Him shatter what you couldn't even dent. And there are burdens that seem invisible to others. You still smile, still show up, still serve. But inside, something's breaking. The pressure is mounting. You keep waiting for someone to notice, to ask, to care. But maybe God is prompting you to speak first. Not because your pain doesn't matter, but because your healing is too important to delay. Sometimes you don't need a rescuer, you need a witness. Someone to say, "I see you." You don't have to hide. The lie of self-reliance sounds holy. I'll pray about it on my own. God is all I need. But even Jesus surrounded Himself with community. He wept in front of His friends. He shared His heart, His fears, His sorrow. And if the Son of God didn't isolate in His suffering, why do we? The truth is, vulnerability isn't dangerous, it's necessary. And when it's offered in the right places, it becomes a doorway for healing, clarity, and relief. There's also a kind of burden that comes from doing good things, ministry, leadership, serving others, carrying emotional weight that no one sees. If that's you, hear this clearly. Even kingdom work becomes unhealthy when it's carried alone. You are not less spiritual for needing rest. You are not less called because you feel drained. Jesus himself withdrew often to be with the Father. You don't need permission to rest. You need the courage to receive it. And when you finally lay it down, when you finally admit, God, I can't carry this anymore, you'll be amazed by what happens. Not just spiritually, but emotionally, physically. Your body has been bearing the weight of a soul stretched too thin. But when the burden lifts, your whole being begins to breathe again. The tightness in your chest releases. The fog in your mind clears. The ache in your spirit loosens its grip. Because you weren't created to live that way. So were you still holding by yourself? What pain are you protecting? What pressure are you pretending doesn't affect you? Maybe today is the day to speak it out loud, to write the message, to call the friend, to fall on your knees and say, God, I need help. Because there's no gold star for suffering in silence. There's no spiritual badge for carrying invisible loads until you collapse. There is only the invitation, come to me. I will give you rest. And that rest is real. It's not reserved for the spiritual elite. It's not earned through performance. It's given freely, abundantly, to every weary heart brave enough to receive it. You don't have to collapse to get there. You can simply release. Not all at once. Maybe one burden at a time. One honest prayer at a time. One trusted conversation at a time. But little by little, the weight lifts. Not because it disappeared, but because you're no longer carrying it alone. So let today be the beginning of that shift. The start of a life lived in the strength of God, not just the effort of your own. You don't have to be the strong one anymore. You don't have to wear the armor every day. You don't have to pretend the weight doesn't hurt. You can lay it down. You can ask for help. And you can rest deeply, safely, completely, knowing that your burden was never meant to be yours alone. Peace isn't found at the end of a checklist or on the other side of perfection. It begins in surrender, right in the middle of the storm, long before anything around you gets better. Most people wait for life to slow down before they rest. They wait for clarity before they trust. But biblical peace doesn't wait. It walks by faith, not by sight. It breathes, even when the air feels tight. And it grows, not in certainty, but in surrender. So many are exhausted, not just in body, but in soul. And beneath that exhaustion is often the silent belief that everything depends on them. That if they stop moving, things will fall apart. That if they don't find all the answers, nothing will make sense. But God never asked you to carry the weight of the world. He simply invites you to walk with Him, one step, one day, one quiet moment at a time. Instead of asking for explanations, lean into the presence of the one who sees everything clearly. There's strength in letting go. There's courage in resting. And there's healing in trusting that you are held, even when you don't understand the path you're on. Surrender isn't weakness. It's alignment. It's choosing to believe that God's promises are more solid than your fears. Let's pause for a moment. Look at your own life with honesty. Is your mind running faster than your spirit can keep up? Have you placed your peace on hold, waiting for the situation to change? It's okay to admit it. Many of us do the same. But here's the beautiful truth. Peace doesn't require your situation to be different. It requires your posture to shift. From self-dependence to God-dependence. From control to trust. From striving to resting. Calm doesn't arrive when you finally gain control. It emerges when you release control. Imagine no longer needing to manage every outcome. No longer having to fix everything in your own strength. Instead, you breathe deeply and say, God, I believe you're working even when I can't see it. That's where your real strength is found. Not in your grip, but in His grace. Think back to the lessons we've walked through. Your mind never stops because it's searching for something solid to hold on to. Anxiety enters when trust in God begins to fade. His voice isn't in the chaos, it whispers through the silence. The enemy speaks in your thoughts, but God speaks to your spirit. Jesus rested during the storm, not because the storm wasn't real, but because He knew who was in control. You don't need to see the full picture to walk in peace. God already saw tomorrow. That means you can breathe today. And when your spirit is leading, your thoughts will follow. Instead of drowning in why, you rise with, I trust you. You choose rest, not as a form of laziness, but as obedience. And finally, you anchor yourself, not in fleeting thoughts, but in eternal promises. Every moment of surrender brings you one step closer to the life God desires for you. Quiet, steady, rooted, free. This is not an emotional escape. It's a spiritual recalibration. It's where healing starts, not where effort ends. What you've learned in these chapters isn't just information. It's transformation waiting to happen. Have you taken time to identify the burden you're still holding on to? That expectation, fear, or memory that you haven't yet laid down? Could it be that the weight you carry isn't even yours to bear? Some loads feel natural because we've carried them so long. But God is gently saying, that was never yours. Give it to me. Evaluate what has been fueling your thoughts. Are they aligned with God's truth or feeding on fear? The words you meditate on will soon become the reality you live in. Promises from God are not decorative. They're your foundation. So what truth from His Word do you need to return to daily, faithfully, boldly, until your spirit is steadier than your surroundings? Rebuilding your inner life doesn't happen in a rush. It happens in the quiet repetition of trust. The way you speak to yourself matters. The way you pray matters. The way you make room for silence matters. There's no magic formula, but there is a spiritual rhythm. And when you move in rhythm with God, even your busiest season can feel lighter. Take some time today to breathe, not just physically, but spiritually. Let your soul exhale. You don't have to perform. You don't have to prove. You are already loved, already seen, already invited into peace. What God offers you is not a fragile calm, dependent on perfect conditions. It's an unshakable calm born from His presence. And it starts not when you understand, but when you trust. So let me ask you, where in your life have you been holding on too tightly? Which thoughts have been leading you away from rest? What truth do you need to cling to now, even if you don't feel it yet? And what small act of surrender can you take today, right now, to move closer to peace? The path won't always be smooth. Some days your faith will feel stronger than others. But each time you choose surrender over control, silence over chaos, trust over fear, you're becoming who you were always meant to be, anchored in God's presence, resting in His love. If this message has helped you realign your heart, don't let it stop here. There are others who need this reminder. Someone out there is overwhelmed. Someone else is pretending they're fine when they're not. Be the one who sends hope. Share this word. Spread this peace. And before you go, I want to invite you to stay connected. This space is more than content. It's a journey. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and walk with us as we keep growing, healing, and learning how to live from a place of calm, not chaos. Until next time, keep showing up. Keep laying it down. Keep listening for His voice. Because when you surrender, you don't lose control. You find peace.